How does the United Nations set up human rights mechanism for state leaders?
Before talking about my suggestion, we would better know more about the United Nations and its principle.
The United Nations is an international organization whose stated aims are facilitating cooperation in international law, international security, economic development, social progress, human rights, and achievement of world peace. The UN was founded in 1945 after World War II to stop wars between countries and to provide a platform for dialogue. Currently, there are 193 member states. The pursuit of human rights was a central reason for creating the United Nations. World War II atrocities and genocide led to a ready consensus that the new organization must work to prevent any similar tragedies in the future. The UN Charter obliges all member nations to promote universal respect for and observance of human rights and to take joint and separate action to the end.
By the UN Charter, we can say that the state leaders or governments of the country have obligation to respect individual human rights. By my case, the state leaders and the government of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan had violated the UN Charter. They should have been punished, but not only because Pakistan had not declared or not signed the optional protocol for human rights. By this logic, any member nation could ignore the UN Charter just by means of not signing optional protocol. Optional protocol is the umbrella for member nations that violate human rights. Perhaps there is a reason why happens so many human rights violations in the world. Hence, we should let UN set up a mechanism for state leaders to respect and implement UDHR.
How? Your suggestions should be practical and acceptable.
If we expect the state leaders to respect the human rights, the UN should have them know and understand the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Actually, it is easy to let state leaders to know and understand UDHR. Every September, state leaders will go to attend UN General Assembly. By this opportunity, the United Nations could organize a half-day study on human rights law for these state leaders.
Oh, it's so interesting. UN Human Rights class for state leaders.
The United Nations and media will open the list who are not attending the study. Usually, state leaders have to sit down and listen to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights because they are afraid being condemned not to respect human rights or being overthrown by their people. No people in the world will support a state leader who does not respect their human rights.
This is a good way to let state leaders study human rights. How to supervise their action effectively?
The United Nations could make a Chapter 2 of the Charter a bit amendment.
Chapter 2. Membership. Article 4. Membership in the United Nations is open to all other peace-loving states, which accept the obligations contained in the present Charter, and in the judgment of the organization, are able and willing to carry out these obligations. By Chapter 2, the admission to membership in the United Nations must be under 3 conditions. First, peace-loving. Second, acceptance of the Charter obligations. Third, being able and willing to carry out the Charter obligations. If a member violates the UN Charter, it may be suspended or expelled from the United Nations. Strictly speaking, the UN Charter obligations are mostly honored or carried out by a government instead of the member nation. In other words, all the governments of a member nation should qualify these conditions. However, in reality, one country can be ruled alternatively by different political parties. Different ruling parties will have different governmental policies based on religion, belief, ideology, or politics. Their qualifications to the UN admission will be quite different. If a government of a member state has seriously violated the UN Charter, how can the United Nations still keep the state as a member? For example, the Cambodian seat in the United Nations had ever been held by different governments with different state leaders, such as King Norodom Sihanouk of the Kingdom of Cambodia, Prime Minister General Lon Nol of the Khmer Republic, and the Khmer Rouge Pol Pot of the Democratic Kampuchea. Estimated about 1/3 of the population were killed by the Khmer Rouge regime, but the United Nations still allowed it to hold the Cambodian seat as a qualified member nation. Therefore, a genocidal regime represented their victims for 15 years in the United Nations. It was 15 years. That's why the UN set up a war crimes court to trial the Khmer Rouge leaders for genocide. It is a pity that UN not to take any action during these state leaders in power. How to change this situation?
We suggested that the United Nations should suspend their membership whenever the government of a member nation changes. The seat will be restored when the state leaders of the new government resign the UN Charter and confirm their obligations.
This is a good mechanism for state leaders to honor their obligations and implement the UDHR.
We have another way to have more people know and enjoy their human rights. Both work together. Our world will become safer and better.